Anyway, John, it's really nice to connect with you. Thank you for reaching out. You have a really awesome story. Well, your brother does, as do you. But before I start, I heard you say Boston, and right away I was like, Boston. I went to Babson College, so I don't know if that's
Oh, no
familiar
way.
to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. So in high school, I went to it was kind of like a retreat weekend, but it was at Babson College, so I know the campus
No
there pretty well.
way.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I've been
it
known for
was fun.
entrepreneurship. Yeah, I graduated in 17. I had a handful of friends who went to the other Bs like BU, BC. But it's certainly a fun area to be in.
Mm. Yeah, I went to BC, as did Tim, who you've been trading emails with. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, big BC family. So, where do you live now?
I'm in Greenville, South Carolina.
Oh,
I moved here from Boston 2 years ago. All the Northerners are coming down, so I'm one of them.
there
But
you go.
it's a pretty sweet area. If you haven't visited, highly recommend coming
Yeah,
and check it out.
yeah, I've been. We went to so BC played at Clemson, so we went down to that game.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. That's probably like a good over an hour from you,
Yeah,
I
it's
think.
like 45 minutes. Clemson football
45
is
minutes.
huge, obviously, as you know. I didn't realize how huge it was until I moved here, but they've kind of
Yeah,
adopted me. All my friends are from Clemson, so it's
there
been
you
fun
go.
though. It's a
There
nice
you go.
area.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, sounds like you really figured life out. I'm sure it's
Not
a little
really.
less stressful down there.
A little bit. Life's a bit slower. I describe Greenville as kind of like the Boston of the South in the sense of like there are a lot of Northerners. Most of my friends are actually transplants.
Hmm.
But yeah, my family's in New Jersey. It's about 45-minute flight home, sometimes an hour. So it's pretty close. It's still nice.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Awesome, John. Well, I don't know if you had a chance to check out Well and Strong, but I started Well and Strong about 4 years ago. Similar to your story, my mom's cancer story was the catalyst that made me start my platform. Started my podcast about a year ago, so it's been fun getting to chat with folks whom I've admired for so long in the health space. But yeah, excited to have you on. I've already heard you on the Believe Big podcast, so I have a bit of an
Awesome.
idea of your story, but certainly for listeners who don't know who John and Christian are, I'd love if you could kick it off with, yeah, telling us how you found yourself in this space, and starting your nonprofit GoingWell, a little bit about Christian's story, and yeah, well, I guess we'll start there.
Absolutely. Do you want the the quick version or the?
However you want it, John. We've got an hour, so you
Okay.
leave that to you.
Yeah. So Christian is so I'm one of four boys, and he's the youngest, and I'm the third. So, um, growing up, he was always the baby of the family. Everyone was always trying to take care of him. He was always everyone's best friend, and his sophomore year in high school, he got diagnosed with bone cancer called osteosarcoma. Um,
Mm.
it had spread from his right knee to both of his lungs at diagnosis, and that took his chance of having a pretty good 5 year outcome to having a pretty poor 5 year outcome. The fact that it had spread made it that much more serious. At the time, we thought, thank God Christian's got some of the best doctors at Dana Farber. He's a big, strong kid, over 6 feet tall. And he took the approach of, give me more chemotherapy. I want to do whatever I can to really fight this thing. And that approach worked for a bit. He was able to get into remission. He stayed there for 5 years. He's had several surgeries on his right leg to remove the diseased tumor, also to kind of replace his existing bone. He had cadaver bone placed at one point. Um, he's had several surgeries on both his lungs called thoracotomies, where they kind of spread his ribs up laterally, and the surgeon will go in with his hands and feel for calcified lesions, which is bone tumor in his lungs.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, he's had the what's called the MAP-IE protocol for chemotherapy. So, really, starting in 2013, in 2014, he was doing a ton of conventional therapy, and that's really all we considered. And he was able to stay there for 5 years until 2020. So in 2020, the pandemic had brought us together. I had fled New York City. If you remember, New York was the first place where COVID kind of
Right.
landed, and I was working in finance at the time. And he so moved home, and in July of 2020, Christian got that dreaded call from his oncology team that, on your 6-month scans, we've seen 2 small nodules on your lungs. This is positive for osteosarcoma. And the outlook when osteosarcoma comes back, it tends to be very aggressive. His chances weren't very good to begin with back in 2013, and now they've only gotten worse. Chemotherapy was expected to be twice as toxic, half as effective. In fact, they were recommending one of the drugs that he had already taken before. Um, so this is when I went from being sort of a supportive brother, someone that just there to kind of cheer him on along the way, to someone who was really willing to had a different perspective, just a different mindset, and it didn't make sense to me to do something that we knew wasn't going to work, and I wanted to consider more options. Really explore in such a big world. How are we limited to one chemotherapy option, or 2 or 3 clinical trials that have a couple drugs that are very similar to each other? So I asked a lot of questions, and a lot of the answers I got, honestly, were very dismissive of my thinking. They said things like, "There's no evidence that that'll work," without really, showing any, without really any consideration whatsoever. So at best, they were dismissive. At worst, they were outright, frustrated by my questions, and we ended up really going all in on the alternative and complementary side. For Christian, it was a really tough decision to turn down the clinical trial in November of 2020, but he didn't really have many better options, and he had seen the level of research and dedication that I had put in, which gave him the confidence and conviction to, for better or for worse, give it a chance. And pretty soon after, wasn't a straight line, but we were able to make things work. In 2020, 2021, he shrank his cancer, had a few encouraging scans, to the point where he knew that we were going to continue to just double, triple down on everything that we were doing. And today he's almost 3 years in remission. So it's been an incredible ride. And honestly, looking back, we knew nothing of what we've learned back then, and so started GoingWell to try and share more information to people earlier on. Hopefully, get to people at diagnosis when they sort of have more options and more ability to change their course of their
Right.
treatment.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's an incredible story. I think sadly, a few points to that. I think sadly, many folks now don't really consider integrative or complementary medicine or therapies until it's more advanced or in the later stages, which again does have its time and place and could be helpful. But I think certainly a more integrative approach from the initial diagnosis would be even more beneficial. To your point about the research, I am really curious what some of the initial resources you went to even were, because as you know, there are just so many. And just for you, for context on me, so my mom was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer back in 2008. And since then, I was 12, 13 years old. And that really sparked a fire in me in terms of figuring out, okay, she's doing this conventional treatment, but why did she get cancer in the first place, right? Cancer didn't even run in our family. And then obviously later learned that over 98% of breast cancer cases are not genetically related. But anyway, so I kind of already dove into that world probably around 13, 14 years old. And then as I mentioned to you, I went to Babson College, studied economics, but during my undergrad years, I wrote a thesis on integrative medicine, specifically in the context of cancer care. So I was researching, John, all these therapies like ozone and mistletoe and high dose IVC. And again, it's funny how God works in the sense of a year after I graduated and published that paper, my mom's cancer came back. And it spread to her bone. Now she's dealing with some liver lesions. But I mean, we've been dealing with this for the past 6 years. But at that point in time, I already had kind of context on which resources to go to. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Moss reports. That was probably my first primary site in terms of just tackling this space and figuring out, okay, of the clinical studies done, which are very few, what has been shown to be most promising. And we know that over like 51% of clinical studies are actually not even true. Dr. Axe did a really great recent podcast on that very topic. But yeah, I mean, how did you even figure out where to start in terms of that research? Because Google also filters a lot, right? And I'm sure you're aware of that too.
Hmm. Yeah, more and more, I find that the search results are less and less helpful. Even in 2020, I think they're more helpful than they are today. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that I'm struck by what you said. The fact that you had already happened to have done a lot of this research, and you kind of were in the perfect position to help your mom. That is exactly what happened to me, I would say. I remember in 2019, I watched the Heal documentary on Netflix. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, this is incredible. This it really resonated with me. Why would you take? Why would drugs be your primary form of healing option? Heal kind of talked about all the Eastern medicine, complementary approaches, everything else that is sort of overlooked by our conventional medical community. And so I saw that documentary in 2019, and I kind of just watched it just for fun. Wasn't really doing anything on a Friday night, and had no idea. But it ended up uh, in that documentary was featured Kelly Turner,
Mhm.
who's a Harvard trained researcher, and I'm sure you know her well, who studied the least likely, the most incredible cancer survivors, people who have run out of conventional options and turned to alternative complementary approaches and then have had success. And she has documented all these cases so that everybody can learn from them.
Yeah.
And I remember I saw her in 2019, so it was really the perfect sort of prerequisite to my brother's recurrence in 2020. At that point, I just had so much conviction. It was almost as if and now the dots looking backwards started to really connect, and it really was put me in the perfect position at the perfect place at the perfect time.
Yeah, I love that. And for listeners, that book is called Radical Remission. So that also too was among the very first books that I read. I looked at a lot of Chris Work's resources as well. Dr. Veronique Desaunier. Again, there's so many. And to that point too, John, I mean, how did you avoid information overwhelm? Because this is something I still struggle with on a daily basis. Because I think, as a caretaker and a caregiver, you want to do everything in your power that you can to help your loved one. And I think sometimes, like, it's not sometimes, often it's too much, right? It's too great of a burden to carry. So that's something I've just been continuing to navigate. I don't have an answer, but I am curious, how do you deal with information overwhelm?
It's such a good question, and if I had a great answer, I would share it with you. I think that having cancer, having a loved one have cancer, is incredibly stressful. It's a really difficult journey for them and for you. And then to take control of the situation and to take control of the medical decision making just adds a level of pressure that is it's like triple the amount of pressure.
Yeah.
um, and so yeah, as someone who wanted to do anything I could for my brother, I knew that there's infinite possibilities of therapies out there. So to the extent that we took our foot off the gas pedal in terms of research and finding options and learning, was the same extent to which he potentially wouldn't have the results that he's having. So
Yeah.
yeah, the pressure, the overwhelm was absolutely there. But I also wouldn't. I don't think I'd change it for anything. I think I've always been someone to set really high goals, unachievably high goals, and then just try to get as close to them as possible.
Yeah.
Um, but now, as I help patients, I think I'm realizing that everything that we're talking about is so underappreciated um, that people haven't even heard of it and they haven't even done it yet. So at this point, it's like there's really only so much benefit to doing more research when
Right.
getting what we already, you and I already know out there
Yeah.
is probably a better use of our time right now.
And that's the thing too. I mean, sometimes you just have to pick a path or pick a treatment and stick with it, right? And it may or may not be the best treatment, but if the patient believes it is, that's half the battle right there. And I'm sure your brother went through that too. I'm curious to hear which different complementary therapies he ended up doing.
Sure, yeah. Uh, High dose vitamin C IVs, I think, have a special place in our hearts because
Yeah, it's a
in
great one.
that 5 week period, so in July of 2020, he had his cancer come back. He was debating whether doing this clinical trial or not. We did high dose vitamin C. He asked for a wait and see period of 5 weeks from his oncology team. In that 5 weeks, we really ramped up the high dose vitamin C, and
Yep.
in those 5 weeks, his cancer shrank, 10 to 15%, enough to give him the courage, conviction that this was the right path that he was on. So that, I think, has a special place in his heart and my parents' heart, and certainly I really, really advocate for it as well. Mistletoe therapy, everything you mentioned. We ozone, hyperthermia. My perspective was to try to bring as much of this into the home as possible because there's so many consultations.
It
Not
gets
only
expensive.
yeah, it gets expensive, and he's just going to so many consultations, not only for the cancer, but then
Yeah.
are your kidney levels okay, et cetera, et cetera, and um, it's just so much of it's so overwhelming that the more that, as someone who's trying to help them, the more I could bring this stuff into the home and make it sort of things that we could do as a lifestyle. Not only was that more, we were able to kind of do it more often, but we could do it, in higher doses and
Right.
have more control over the whole process. So, yeah, we brought ozone into the home. We've brought PEMF into the home. We have a
Mhm.
sauna at home. Um, and then the repurposed drugs that we've been able to access, he does at home. Sees a naturopath over Zoom,
Yep.
and
Which repurposed drugs did he try? I'm curious.
so fenbendazole he's taken.
He did. Did he do the Joe Tippins protocol, or is he just taking Fenben on its own?
He did he
Because
That's a
I
good
know the
question.
Joe Tippins protocol calls for like Tudka and like all of these other things, and I know there are also people who literally just take fenbendazole or mebendazole on its own.
Yeah, I so we incorporated fenbendazole alongside his overall protocol with his naturopath. I don't think we did the
That
rest
protocol.
of
Yeah.
yeah, the rest of what Joe recommends. Although I'm sure there's a lot of great value to it.
Yeah. Did he try ivermectin?
We've taken ivermectin for COVID, but not he
Gotcha.
hasn't taken it for cancer.
Yeah, so interesting. Was your family like, I mean, it sounds like they're much more wellness oriented now, but prior to your brother's diagnosis, like, would you say that your family was relatively health conscious?
No, not necessarily. I mean, for, we were. I think like my whole family's whole perspective has their whole worldview has kind of turned upside down. They went from really trusting the medical institutions to really having a whole lot of skepticism and
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think our perspectives changed in terms of health consciousness. They were. they were no more or less health conscious than most people. We tried to avoid processed food and fast food and stuff, but
Yeah.
not, we stopped drinking soda a long time ago as a
Yeah.
family, but
It's a start.
yeah, certainly a start. It's,
um,
yeah.
No, that's yeah, that's important. My mom was always pretty health conscious. She, in fact, I say she's one of the pioneers of Whole Foods because when they first came out, she would be in that store. But again, there are so many other factors that can lead to cancer formation, like lack of sleep and stress, that again people don't necessarily think of when they think of cancer, that are equally as important, if not more, than the food you eat.
Hmm.
So super important there. But yeah, I am curious, John, and you're probably not going to have a solid answer to this because I certainly don't. But when we look at conventional oncology, right? How do we fix our healthcare system? And this was a whole chapter in my thesis, not necessarily about fixing, but like identifying the problems. And I think, I mean, one of my best friends went into medicine. She's a pediatrician. And I don't necessarily think she went into pediatrics like with poor intent, right? Like people go to medical school because they want to help people, because that's where their heart is, which is wonderful. But I think sadly, our medical system in this country has been infiltrated by big pharma to the point where, I don't want to say brainwashed, but to an extent, these students do become brainwashed in kind of, looking at disease in terms of, okay, how do we treat this disease with a drug? And I think it's really interesting that if you look at the curriculum of naturopathic doctors, the first 2 years are the exact same as a regular medical student. It's the latter 2 years that differ, where for conventional medicine, they focus on drugs, right, for treatment. And naturopathic medicine is more, again, natural medicine and that focus on prevention. So, I mean, I think our healthcare system is a little bit, too corrupt to even be fixed, but how do we help remedy, especially in the cancer space, a lot of this corruption that's going on?
Yeah. So I'll give you, my perspective, my solution, sort of the long-term vision for Going Well, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I agree with you. I think that the system's so broken that you almost have to start over. So the long-term vision, and I haven't shared this with anyone publicly, but I'll share it with you.
I'm honored.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The long-term vision is to use a what I would call university endowment model. So Going Well is a 501c3 nonprofit. Will charge patients for naturopathic care out of pocket with sort of like a kind of tuition membership plus charge for services. We'll have really high prices for that, but then offer sort of financial aid to try and make it work for everybody. That way we can have the funds to be able to compete with big pharma, to defend ourselves legally, to continue to study natural, holistic, and complementary approaches to really become experts in the space of, we have a pancreatic cancer. What should we do?
Mm-hmm.
So sort of high fees, but with a financial aid model, and then also accept donations to have an endowment that we will invest and sort of run like a college endowment is run. So sort of like a hedge fund model where we take these funds and invest them over time. So at a high level, that's sort of where I see the end point for Going Well. I think it's something that can it's the only way to really be a resource that is powerful enough to uh, be something that people would want to turn to at diagnosis.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's so many different elements to it, but
That's awesome. I love
yeah,
that.
that's
See, the finance background comes into play, right? Who would have thought that you would be using those skills now? I love that. I think that's genius. Speaking of Going Well, I mean, I know about it obviously, but can you let listeners know what exactly it is and how does it work? Because it's a pretty cool platform.
sure. Yeah, going well is has been the result of everything that we've talked about today in Christian success, and we want to share that with more people. So what we've done is we've collated some of these amazing survivors, people who have beat the odds from a conventional perspective. We've brought them onto the Going Well platform. So anybody facing a cancer diagnosis or has a friend or a loved one who they want to kind of share this perspective of complementary and alternative medicine can log on to our site for absolutely no charge at all. You can order a video from a survivor of their particular type of cancer to hear their story. They'll put together a personalized video, not sharing not only their story, but hope and inspiration, potentially a few recommendations for where they would start if they were in your shoes. And we've seen some amazing success with some of the videos produced. People have been, really excited to A, get the video, and then B, take action from it. And a few of our patients have had incredible levels of success shrinking cancer markers. One guy shrank his cancer marker 50% in the first month after receiving a video and making some basic lifestyle changes. So yeah, it's an
That's
amazing
awesome.
resource. It's completely free, donor funded, uh, and yeah, that's where Going Well stands today.
I love that. I love that it's cancer specific, right? Because I think it's very challenging. There are a multitude of different types of cancers out there. So to be able to locate someone who has your exact type and then have them serve as a guide in that journey is really great. I wrote a 30-page guide on an integrative approach to breast cancer derived from my honors thesis that I have available on Well and Strong. I'll link it in the show notes, but it's basically everything from resources, right? Like things that I wish I knew, not only when my mom was first diagnosed, but also during her recurrence to really just outline again, like these are the steps that I wish I had taken. That's certainly I know now, but to hopefully help others who are facing a diagnosis themselves or, serving as a caregiver. So I love that. And have you heard of Healing Strong, John?
I have.
Okay,
Yeah.
so interestingly, even before I started Well and Strong, I connected with Susie Griswold, who's the founder, and I was enamored with her whole plan too to basically connect cancer survivors and create these groups like across the country. I think even in Canada, that again are just groups of cancer survivors, and they sit and they go through the curriculum. But you should definitely tap into that network because I'm sure there are a lot of people who would love to share their stories and be on your platform.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've traded a couple of emails with Susie, but we haven't actually been able to connect. So,
Yeah.
Healing Strong is an amazing organization, and definitely, if I had cancer, it'd be something I would be a part of.
Yeah, I love that. Knowing what you know now, John, I know you mentioned earlier that, you wouldn't necessarily change anything, but what would you tell yourself? Like right at Christian's first diagnosis. It could even just be words of encouragement, like looking back, what would you want yourself to know?
Yeah, yeah. One of the first things that pops into my head is to know that any particular scan or 3 month period or piece of good news or bad news is not the end.
Yep.
It's never. It's natural to be on this emotional roller coaster throughout the whole ride, but it doesn't have to be that way. Good news is never final, and neither is bad news.
Yeah.
Um, Also, just to keep an open mind, to know that to carve your own path and really follow your intuition and what figure out what resonates most with you. Ultimately, we're ultimately responsible for the outcome, so might as well take on the responsibility of any kind of decision making. And to find people who support the way that you think or the approach that you want to take, and keep those people close, and they'll be uh, your your sort of support system and group to go through it all. I know, a lot of these decisions are tough. It has the potential to tear families apart. Some people, I know one woman who healed her cancer naturally, whose entire family and extended family thought she was crazy, and they thought she was, potentially just couldn't understand her perspective. Um, So I know that, some people might not see things. You have to be okay with other people not necessarily seeing the world the way that you see the world,
Yeah.
and to really lean into your convictions and what you know to be true.
Yeah. No, that's really great advice for myself and for my mom. I mean, as Christians, we turn to Jesus and we pray for guidance, right? That he'll direct our steps, and I think that's given us a lot of comfort in all the decisions that we've made. But I also, too, going back to what you said about intuition, I certainly think that's very important, right? Like, what is your gut telling you to do? And I think that's the Holy Spirit. But leveraging your business skills, Jon, do you have a framework that you kind of go to when faced with making a treatment decision for your brother?
It's a great question. So, as I've gotten older, I kind of play it all by feel at this point. Um, there are some questions that there's some basic things that I think about when it comes to making a medical decision. So, first of all, I think conventional medicine totally overlooks the side effects of some of the treatments. So they're so focused on, will this shrink cancer, that they'll totally overlook the side effects. So one of the first questions I like to ask when considering any kind of treatment, repurposed drug or whatever it might be, is what are the side effects? Because pharmaceutical drugs that have good effects, that have good anti-cancer benefit with low side effects, I think are really good options.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the side effects? Is the potential treatment at hand? Could it work? Could it be viable? I had one patient who was talking about having his pancreas removed, and at that point, it's a surgery that's been done, maybe once or twice before, and living without a pancreas, you're now a diabetic for life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, it was pretty clear that if he were to take that, even if that surgery is successful at removing his cancer, that he'd have no quality of life thereafter. And, with all of these surgeries, there's always so many complications that come out of them. So, like, don't do something that is like just clearly not going to lead to a good life.
Yeah.
Um, because you don't know what else is out there. You learn more as you go. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, those are kind of two frameworks. What are the side effects, and like, is this viable? Is this, does this really make sense, um,
Yeah.
long term?
You do learn more as you go, and I think it's really important for people just to show themselves grace. I know there was a situation a few years ago where my mom had a prophylactic surgery done that we were told she needed to have. Long story short, she didn't need to have it, and had some complications as a result of it. But I think it's also really important that, when you do make those decisions, that you look back and you say, okay, I made a decision at that point in time with the knowledge I had at the time, and that was the best decision at the time that I thought I should make, right? So just kind of showing yourself grace throughout the process, because hindsight is 2020, right? And you learn from your experiences, you help others, and you move on with your life. Um, but yeah, that's so true. And you said when you work with patients, Jon, so like, do you do like coaching with these patients on Going Well?
Only informally, no, not formally at all. I try to stay close to the patient just to learn as much as I can and stay,
Yeah.
stay sharp in what I do. Um, as part of Going Well, a lot of our patients will order a video, and then I'll end up giving them some informal advice along the way.
Yeah.
So, but
That's
yeah, I
awesome.
totally agree with you. Regretting certain past decisions, of course, is not, it's not helpful, not productive. But but yeah, I really believe in the naturopathic way of, less is more. Do less harm. First, do no harm, and then, and work from there. Because, um,
Yeah.
once you start on these medical treatments that are so invasive and brutal, you kind of turn yourself into a patient for life, even if it's successful against the cancer.
Right. Because your body depends on it. And I think that's the thing I love about naturopathic or integrative medicine is that it essentially supports your body's self-healing processes, right? Mistletoe helping to increase natural killer cell count and boosting your immune system. So they're all therapies that basically support your own body ability to heal such that you do the healing on your own, right? You're not dependent upon a drug to do that. And I mean, to your point about, drugs that have minimal side effects, I definitely think there's a time and place, but just looking at my mom's case, for example, I mean, she's switched from targeted drug to targeted drug to targeted drug because what happens ultimately is the tumors develop new mutations, right? And then it's just like a matter of, okay, is there another drug that targets this mutation without necessarily addressing the underlying root of the cancer, the metabolic issues? Speaking of side effects, there's one drug that she's considering that causes your blood glucose to spike significantly, and we know that glucose drives cancer. So you just kind of question, right? It's like, what's the risk benefit of these medications? But yeah, definitely a time and place for sure. Um, Question on the helping patients front. Cancer is obviously a very heavy topic, right? So how do you? I mean, I'm a very empathetic person, and I like when I talk to people who are struggling, I kind of take on their burdens. That's just how I am. So how do you like maintain boundaries around yourself, right? To kind of protect your like well-being internally without getting so bogged down by the heaviness of this topic.
Another such a great question. And it's again, I think I'm also empathetic. I think I also can have a tendency to take on a lot of the pain and the emotional burden of the patients that I work with. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a I don't I'm not sure I figured that one out. I think
I haven't
yeah,
either,
I,
but
I
just
I think it's
showing
not.
yourself grace, right?
Yeah, I think it's something I'm working through and trying to figure out. With going well, we want to try to scale something to have as much impact as possible. So, um, to some extent, I'm learning how to not, get so necessarily emotionally involved in any one particular case. Although
Yeah.
it's kind of natural for me to, we know so much about all these natural and integrative therapies, and we know how much good we can do. It's only natural to really want to help.
Yeah. So true. One other question for you. With this platform, so you connect patients who have successfully either put their cancer into remission or healed completely with other patients who have the same cancer. How do you, and completely fine if you don't have an answer to this, but I'm just curious, like for my mom's case, for example, I remember the first few folks that I spoke with who had the same exact cancer and did all these wonderful therapies. It was overwhelming going back to our initial question of how do you, discern like when to stop with information overload. And with all these people we spoke to, it was like, okay, this woman did XYZ therapies, and then this woman did like ABC therapies, and both had success, right? Same exact type of cancer. How do we choose what to do? Right. So like, do you have any advice for navigating a situation like that, right? Where like you don't necessarily want that patient to copy like word for word or like therapy for therapy what that person did. And I know it's more about like encouraging them and providing them with resources, but how do you avoid that, right? Like having each patient like have that mentality of, oh, I have to do this, this, and this because this is what this person with my type of cancer did and she healed.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that patients can figure out. I agree with you. You don't kind of want whiplash of like I have to do what this person did, but yet sharing that level of inspiration is sort of what we're all about to begin with.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it comes down to, you know thinking from our story and what all the research I did for Christian. It was doing a lot of research, finding different people who've had success with different approaches, and then like kind of hearing about it twice or you hear about it a third time. That's when you're like, okay, okay, we should really chase this one down. We should really implement this. because you hear something, and maybe you hear something in a different type of cancer, and it sounds compelling. It's from someone you really trust, and it sounds cool, but you're not really compelled to do it. But then you hear about it 6 months later or 3 months later from another person you really trust completely separately, and that's when you say, all right, there's a whole lot behind this, and we have to figure out how to implement it. I
Yeah.
think a good example on that would be like fenbendazole. So the idea of taking a pet dewormer, at one point in my life was absolutely insane. Why would we do that? That's, I understand how crazy and how much skepticism that invites. But I heard we had a neighbor that lived about a mile away from us. People who are, husband's an engineer and wife's a pianist, and they're both very intelligent people that we've known for 6-7 years. They recommended it to us, and then separately, through all my research, I had connected with someone who said that her husband's brain tumor was shrinking because he was on fenbendazole. And
Yeah.
so, because I was doing this legwork myself and contacting these people, I came to really trust what they had to say. And then it became pretty obvious that fenbendazole was going to be an amazing option and something that we definitely should implement. So um, that's kind of how that worked. I don't think, if one person told me to do a pet dewormer, I don't think I would go for it. But you hear about
Yeah.
it two or three
Multiple
times, and
stories.
yeah, and then you're like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I, I'm here, I'm listening,
And
and
that's the thing. No, I was gonna say, like, and intuitively too, like sometimes like when you first have that initial reaction, like this is crazy, but then you actually start to like look at it like look at the mechanisms like by which it's supposed to work, you realize, wait, actually this makes a lot of sense, right? And to your
yeah,
point, change
exactly.
everything.
And you also come to understand that fenbendazole is prescribed for pets, but mebendazole is the human version, and the two drugs are actually very, very similar, and they're actually very well tolerated in both humans and animals. And then you realize that every drug that's ever created is tested on mice first, and so you kind of get more comfortable with the idea, because you kind of think
Yeah.
it through logically. So it's really not, you know, people people who are taking pet uh, pet drugs are not nearly as crazy as they sound initially on the surface. Once you kind of understand their
Yeah.
reasoning and their background.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And obviously, certainly want to say for anyone listening, like, do not do any protocols on your own. Like, definitely consult with an integrative practitioner who can give you a legitimate protocol. I know with fenbendazole too, you also have to be really careful in watching your liver enzymes every month. So that's why it's important to be under the care of a practitioner. But yeah, I couldn't agree more, John.
Absolutely, and I just want to echo that. This that's something that we did with Christian. Um, but definitely, consult your naturopath, consult your doctors, consult as many people as possible that have licensed medical degrees. I actually like not having a medical degree because I'm more free to speak about our story, and
Yeah.
I'm not tied to a medical license. But
Right.
anyone listening definitely should get some legal medical advice.
I love that. Well, John, it was really great chatting with you. I love your story. Thanks for coming on the show. Where can listeners learn more about Going Well?
Yeah, so check us out, goingwell.org, and you'll see our site and our platform of survivors, and you can order a video absolutely free. And also, I wanted to mention we also have a brand of grounding, earthing sheets and pillowcases that we have
Awesome.
available. It's a child brand of Going Well, so it's all in the same nonprofit. It's called northstargrounding.com. And I'll create a discount code for any of your listeners. So we'll say Well and Strong 15,
Awesome.
for 15% off. I'll make sure that I send you that code so you can add it to the podcast. And yeah, just a quick pitch on grounding. I think it's one of the absolute best things that anybody can do. It's so easy. You can sleep with it. The 7 to 9 hours that we're in bed every night is the um, it's our time for restoration, and it is, yeah, again, so easy. It's the longest time of the day that we're stationary and can be connected to the earth outside. So I'm not sure if you practice much grounding either outside or with any kind of devices or anything, but it's something that I along the way realized this is potentially the easiest thing to do. It's sort of the lowest hanging fruit, and that's something that everybody should do. So with North Star, we're targeting more than just cancer patients, but really are driving the same overall mission.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, huge fan of grounding over here. In fact, I actually stopped someone the other day who I saw walking barefoot, and I got so excited. I was like, "Are you grounding?" And they were like, "Yes." So that's awesome. Kudos to you. I'll definitely include the link to that in the show notes. Um, my last question for you, Jon. This is my favorite one to ask. I don't know if you're expecting it, but that is, what does being well and strong mean to you?
Wow. All right.
No pressure.
No, I love it. I think being well and strong to me means really understanding who you are and being shamelessly self-expressive, um,
Love that.
and really holding on to your convictions as a person, um, in addition to living as healthy and as sort of purpose-driven life as possible. So um, to really kind of understand who
Love
you
that.
are and roll with it.
Couldn't agree more. Try to do that every single day. Well, Jon, thank you again so much for your time. Give your brother a big congratulations and a hug from me. I wish you both the best. Let me know how else I could help support your platform. But yeah, I'm really excited to share this with listeners, and I'll let you know when it drops.